I'm going to let it run. Check out the melody. All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackman, Saturday Down South. Going to be joined on this episode by my guy, Eric Fawcett. At some point, Gator Country, you all know him from there. Burner Ball with Kevin Sweeney. Does a lot of that stuff. Coming at you guys on the YouTube channel. So make sure you hit that like button, pound that subscribe button. You guys know what to do. Leave your reviews on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you consume this content. We're going to have a bunch of stuff up at our Patreon too soon, patreon.com/Florida BB Hour. If you're not subscribed to that, you should be. There's 3 different tiers you can subscribe. At that $3 tier, you're going to get a lot of this stuff. At that top $5 tier, you're going to get everything. So it's just a matter of what you want to pay per month. There's also an annual option now where you can subscribe annually. I know we got an ACC-SEC challenge thoughts video up. We're going to revisit some of our preseason projections from before the national title and talk some of that too. So should be a lot of really good content coming your way on the Patreon. This is the podcast, which, because we're listener supported on the Patreon side, we don't do the podcast quite as often, but there's a lot to talk about here as we kind of get into the summer action. So ACC-SEC challenge, I guess, is where I want to start. And I feel like if we start there, that's fine. That makes it a kind of a good sequential show where we get into the news first, and then we get into other stuff. So ACC-SEC challenge matchups are out. The matchups are Florida and Duke at Camden Indoor Stadium. Louisville is going to go to Arkansas. North Carolina at Kentucky. NC State at Auburn. Missouri at Notre Dame. Tennessee at Syracuse. SMU at Vanderbilt. Clemson at Alabama, which is kind of another one of those rematches that's come up. Virginia's going to go to Texas. Oklahoma at Wake. Miami at Ole Miss. Texas A&M at Pitt. Miss State at Georgia Tech. Georgia at Florida State, another one that's a rematch of years past. LSU at BC. And Virginia Tech visiting South Carolina. There's your 16 ACC-SEC challenge matchups. I'd say there's 4 that I'm most excited about. I'll do them in reverse order. I'm really excited about SMU Vanderbilt. I think it's a really interesting matchup between 2 coaches in their second year, both of whom had some success in their first year. Obviously, Vanderbilt had more success under Mark Byington in year 1 than SMU did under Andy Enfield. But Andy Enfield is nice and bankrolled. And I think when you kind of consider the money that SMU has to spend in the portal and Vandy's still trying to build that infrastructure, could be a situation where the Mustangs have the better roster. But Memorial Gym, always a tough place to play. And I think you have to consider the Commodores the favorite in that one. I would say my number 3 favorite game that I'm looking forward to the most. You're gonna all be really interested that I'm not gonna talk about North Carolina, Kentucky, because I just don't like North Carolina's roster, and I don't think, even though it's Battle of the Blue Bloods and that's cool TV, I can't see a scenario where North Carolina goes into Rupp and gets a win. And you guys know that pains me to say as a Tar Heel myself, but I don't think any of that's going to happen. My number 3 then is clearly going to be Louisville, Arkansas. I think you have multiple guys who are in the top 25 in the transfer portal on Louisville. They have shooters galore: Ryan Conwell, Isaac McNeely, sharpshooter from Virginia, Adrian Woolley from Kennesaw State. Pat Kelsey did a great job building that roster. And then there's the 5-star freshman guards, Mikael Brown Jr., the Florida kid. Went up to Louisville, committed to Kelsey, their first big-time get up there. And then Darius Acuff Jr., who I think is going to be spectacular. Is going to have a chance to be first or second team All-SEC player. I love him. He was the best player by miles at the Iverson Classic. That game's going to be super fun. My number 2 game in the SEC-ACC Challenge is Auburn and NC State. NC State head into the jungle. Look, I think if this game were at PNC in Raleigh or Reynolds Arena, like I feel like you could go NC State in this matchup, but obviously with Tahad Pettiford coming back, that changed things for Auburn a great deal. And I also think like Kaishan Hall, who was an all Big 12 player last year at UCF, and he strikes me as kind of an Elijah Martin type, where he was barely in the top 100 in some portal rankings. And like, man, I think that guy's a stud. Like, I think he is the classic Bruce Pearl portal get that comes in and is immediately impactful. Like, I love his game. I think he's going to be a spectacular fit, and I can't wait to see him play. And then NC State, obviously, on the flip side of that, they built really a wonderful roster, right? I think when you look at what they did, it's probably one of the best, first-year rosters in the sport. I love Iowa's roster, but Ben McCullum had a huge advantage because his point guard from Drake came with him. Here, like Trey Holloman has played 106 basketball games at Michigan State for one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport. And that's who you get to run your roster. They brought in Terrence Arsenault, who doesn't defend like a traditional Houston player, which is why he wasn't on the floor much, but is still a guy who played in the national title game. Darian Williams, who nearly eliminated the national champions from the NCAA tournament almost single-handedly in the second half last year, took over that game. Quadir Copeland was a guy who helped Will Wade and McNeese upset who did they beat in the NCAA tournament? Well, they had an upset win, I know, in the first round of the NCAA tournament. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on who. Oh, Clemson. They beat Clemson. So anyway, I love their roster. That game is going to be special, and can't wait to watch. Hope it's not scheduled at the same time as Florida's visit to Cameron Indoor, which will be on December 2nd. I think it's a huge test for Duke. Like, I know a lot of people have said, oh, Duke's at home, they're kind of the favorite. And maybe that's true. Like, on a neutral floor, I would certainly pick the Gators. Right now, Duke actually has higher odds to win the national title at plus 1,300. The Gators are at plus 1,600 at MGM Sportsbook. So, maybe even on a neutral, Duke is the favorite. Duke is not just the Boozer twins, and I think that's the important thing. Like, yes, I was a little surprised that Tyrese Proctor didn't come back for his senior year at Duke and become that kind of rare Duke senior. But at the same time, I felt like, even without him, they get Malik Brown back, who has Final Four experience, and it makes that team kind of tough. Caleb Foster came back. He had his struggles as a sophomore, but still shot 40% from beyond the arc as a freshman. And if he regains his freshman form, I love that player. Cameron Sheffield is a guy who they expect to take a jump. I thought it was a weird take, honestly, from Rice. I'm not sure that there's anything positive that he necessarily does, but they like him. And then you get into the freshmen, right? You get into the fact that Cameron Boozer is an absolute killer who is 6'9". He can score, he can rebound, he guards. He's won 3 Peach Jams, so he's an absolute winner. I don't think his brother is as good as him. If you were to ask me to rate the 3-headed Knight Riders monster of Cam Boozer, Caden Boozer, and Alex Lloyd, I would put the other Boozer twin behind Alex, but I think that, he's still, a winner who can score. I like the opportunity, I think. I like the opportunity that Florida has to get out there and to play and to challenge themselves in one of the most fierce arenas in college basketball. And ultimately, like, the game kind of comes down to whether, like, Patrick Nangba Malik Brown, Nicholas Kamina, the other freshman for Duke, and that Duke front court can hang with the Florida front court, because I think Florida's guards are going to score in that game, right? Even if Xavion Lee struggles, I love Boogie Flan to be impactful at Cameron Indoor. He's played in those types of environments already. He'll be the best guard from a talent standpoint on the floor. So the question to me becomes battle of the front courts. And I liked Duke to kind of hang with the Gators last year in the front court, but obviously not all the pieces from that team are back. It's a new Duke roster. Look, the Blue Devils were interesting last year, right? Because they had those early tests and they won the test at home when they played Auburn, right? But they lost neutral floor tests to teams that weren't nearly as good in Kentucky and Kansas. And we thought at the time that Kansas was really good. And it turns out Kansas wasn't very good at all. I mean, they were fine, but by Kansas standards, they certainly weren't good. And then Kentucky was they were a very good team, right? They went to the Sweet 16, but they had no business beating Duke on a neutral. So like a December 2nd game is a nice time for Florida to play them. And I haven't talked to any of Florida staff about that game, which, usually I get some messages or I'll have the opportunity to chat with some people in the building. I haven't. Like, I'm just kind of looking at these rosters side by side and matching up. Gotta say, I kind of think that, it's a game Florida can win. It's a game Florida can win. It would surprise me less if Florida won that game than, say, if Florida got beat by 10 by UConn, right? I won't say it would surprise me less if Florida won the UConn game, because even though that's not really a neutral floor, at least it's semi-neutral. It's kind of a semi-away, whereas you got the pure away game with Duke. But I expect Florida fans to travel just away. Like, Auburn had more visiting fans in that building than anybody in years, is what one Duke staffer told me at the Final Four. So, like, yeah, I mean, my sense is it's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge for Florida's rebuilt backcourt in particular. It's a game we'd love to have Denzel Aberdeen in, to be honest, but and just his experience. But yeah, not a terrible matchup for Florida. So that's kind of where those things are. Just give me 1 second, and I will get into the next topic, which is the NBA draft. All right, sorry guys, a little delay, but yeah, want to get into the NBA draft, which is coming up, and wouldn't expect to record until after the NBA draft, barring anything insane happening. So where are we at? A couple of things that like I would point out from an NBA draft standpoint is like the two mocks I'm paying attention to the most right now are the Athletic and their mock draft, and then the No Ceilings mock draft. Actually, Fawcett's joining us now, so rather than dive into draft stuff, I'm totally pivoting because I've talked SEC-ACC challenge. I want to do a couple like serious basketball questions that some people had, because I think this is the best use of the 15-20 minutes we get this sweet cameo from Edmonton Singers assistant coach Eric Fawcett. Eric, good to see you, man.
Hey, good to be here. And yeah, sorry it's been a little while to everyone that's listening here on the podcast, but it has not been a while on the Patreon. Again, in the off season, particularly, this is where a lot of the content is going. So while there hasn't been a podcast in a little while, man, just in the last couple of weeks, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 videos since in the last 2 weeks in the off season. So if that just tells you anything about just how much the content, how much content there is there. And then of course, if anyone wants to jump in now, they can go back and watch and listen to everything, and a lot of it is now evergreen. So it's I know that probably some people would have thought about a product like this to be active during the season, and that's definitely the case. But honestly, I think a lot of the value here is in the dog days of the summer, when it keeps the content rolling when people really want it. But anyways, point being, been grinding away at some of that stuff recently, but definitely good to get back to a regular podcast here.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So just diving into some of the questions that we've got. The first question, we have this comment about the Edmonton Oilers, and I don't want to trigger Jake Winderman, so we won't get into the gargantuan collapse at Sunrise in front of Taylor Swift the other night that cost the Panthers a 3-1 lead. But I will say, at least the Stanley Cup Finals and the NBA Finals appear to be close. But no, diving into the just Florida. The question I keep getting, and I don't know about you, Eric, I know you've got message boards and DMs and all that stuff too, but the question I keep getting is like, what do you think of the way that, and I know we've talked about it on the Patreon, another reason to subscribe, but a little bit of like what you think about that kind of Boogie Flan, Xavion Lee pairing. And then maybe, we can dive into, I don't want to talk Houck at the 3 again. We've talked that a lot, and I honestly just don't think he's going to play a ton there. From what I'm hearing, he's going to have an opportunity to. I think it will be less than 50% of his minutes, to be quite frank. And so I don't think we need to do that, but like what you'd be looking for in terms of front court improvement can be like part B.
Yeah, so the backcourt. I mean, if you were to rewind before last season, when I was, of course, quite wrong talking about how I thought Florida's season was going to go, one of the concerns I had was that I didn't think Florida had enough ball handling. I didn't think that between Walter Clayton being at the point guard spot and guys at the secondary ball handling positions in Richard and Elijah Martin, who I think are okay, but certainly not above average ball handlers. I thought that was going to be a concern. And I still think when you look across college basketball, a lot of teams that are successful have multiple ball handlers. So it would certainly be very foolish, even though Florida just won a championship, without having anyone that would really be classified as an elite ball handler. It would still be foolish to me to go back on what I kind of still believe is something that works a lot at the college level and really a lot of levels, of having multiple ball handlers. So while it's not the most perfect fit in terms of two guys that are probably best with the ball in their hands, I still like that there are multiple players who can make plays, who can distribute. I think that. And honestly, I'm jumping out a little bit, but if you're looking for front court improvement, one of the things that I actually think limited Florida's front court in a lot of ways is the fact that there wasn't a lot of great passers in Florida's backcourt. And there wasn't guys who could really connect with on lobs with all these really tall, athletic guys. And again, there's certainly moments that I'm sure, as I'm going to say that, people are going to think like, oh, well, there's a lot of those plays where like Walter Clayton hooked up with Alex Condon on those empty sides. There's one game he had like 3 in the second half. And like, yes, that was definitely there on empty side, poorly tagged ball screens. That's and hey, that was great. I'm not saying that Walter Clayton is a dreadful passer. I just am saying I don't think
he's a very good transition passer.
I just don't think he's an above average one. So I think if you're actually looking to how the front court could have a better season, well, now there's 2 guys who are better passers when it comes to throwing lobs, when it comes to pocket passes and the pick and rolls, when it comes to hitting a guy in the dunker spot for just a catch and a reverse layup around the rotation. Like that's one place that even if Florida's front court doesn't get better or improve or whatever you want to say, I honestly think the production is going to be better and the efficiency is going to be better, because I think that now with the front court, you've got guys that can really get them the ball in places to be successful. So that's something I really like about bringing in two point guards. And I do think it's going to be pretty interesting to see exactly how they play, because I do think that Boogie Fland is the better pick and roll player. I think that Xavier Lee is the better isolation player. Xavier Lee is also the player who's better at shooting off the dribble, and Boogie Fland is the better player shooting off the catch. So, like, perhaps in a perfect world, you'd have a guard who is the better pick and roll and isolation player who has the ball in their hands, and then you'd have the better catch and shoot player off the ball most of the time. That fit is not going to work particularly naturally. Again, and we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Lee becomes the better pick and roll player, but I do think that Fland is considerably better in the pick and roll. And if anyone is curious, I mean, the best way to supplement this is to go watch the film studies on Patreon, where you'll see film that kind of talks about what we're discussing. But I do think offensively, I think having more ball handlers, better passing is a good move. It's certainly going to be a different look than Florida's backcourt last year. And again, I think my biggest issue would be on the defensive end with Lee, particularly with where you put him. And I think Boogie Fland is a tremendous defender, as I feel I was one of the first people to really point out in that discussion when everyone was looking at just like, oh, this 5-star coming to Gainesville after a good freshman season. And I think offensively he got a little bit more accolades. I mean, I think he's a better defender than he is an offensive player. And I think he's tremendous getting over screens. I think he's tremendous in as a point of attack guy. So that's the guy I want guarding point guards. So just putting Lee off the ball, does that insulate him? I think it will a little bit. I think that'll be a better kind of fit and allow him to be a little bit more disruptive on the defensive end. It's think it is better than a lot of. It's actually kind of funny. I'll say this. I think a lot of people are saying, wow, this is incredible. Florida got two insanely talented players, but the fit doesn't work. They're a little more down on the talent of the two, but it's better, I think. And again, not saying that I think they're not talented players. I think it's just I think the hype of them is a little higher than just what I see personally. Again, I've talked about the Patreon, but I actually think the fit is better. So again, in some ways, I'm a little bit backwards of what a lot of the other kind of or national media is saying.
So that's funny. Like I've talked to a couple staff members that think the same thing. Like they think they love the fit. They think, and to your point, and also to plug the Patreon again, there was also a unique kind of video that Eric did on Xavier Lee. I think it was a supplemental one where he talked about, like, when you say Boogie Fland is the better pick and roll player, there's still things that Xavier Lee does in the pick and roll that Florida didn't have on its roster last year. And so the nuance takes you get at the Patreon are like almost the biggest reason to subscribe, quite honestly. And one of the reasons that Fawcett's so good at this, and like him and Sweeney do an incredible show on college basketball, and it's been a privilege to work with him, is like that kind of stuff, because like Xavier Lee is going to be able to make, I think, Florida's bigs a lot more effective on those short rolls and things where Florida wasn't able to particularly exploit, like what should be an advantage for Alex Condon, given his like quickness and athleticism. And I think Xavier Lee and pick and rolls probably, makes them better in that way. Then the one other point I'd add on the backcourt is that we haven't talked a lot about Alex Lloyd, because, it's not a CP3 Synergy situation. Quite honestly, I don't know how much Night Riders video, if any, there is on Synergy.
Oh, let me actually check while you talk, and maybe I can, plug that I will do a video if there's enough video available.
No, I love that. So I was going to say the thing about Alex is that he's a true two. He's not a point guard, but he can handle the ball. He can score at 3 levels, and I think he's a real shot maker. To me, who he reminds me of is like Christian Anderson at Texas Tech. If Christian Anderson were 6'5", right? And like because like Christian Anderson also plays good defense and is like super active. His steal numbers were really high for a freshman. He was good in passing lanes, but I also think he can like only guard ones, Eric. Right. And so like with Lloyd, I know I don't want him guarding threes, but I don't have a problem with him guarding anywhere on the perimeter. And if he gets caught in a switch with a three, at least he's 6'5". He's undersized, but at least he has that rank. I think Alex will be a pretty high-level three-point shooter by the end of his career. If he shoots 34% from three as a freshman, then he would have been a top three-point shooter on Florida last year. So, like, if they get that kind of production from him coming off the bench, I think that's great. Now, Florida does not have the non-conference schedule that they had last season where you could roll out a freshman and be like, yeah, I wonder what's going to happen. Like I was driving in my car the other day thinking about Florida Duke. And I was like, oh man, the first time like Alex Lloyd touches the ball in that game, it could either be like, I hope it's an open, he can set his feet three, because otherwise, like I have these visions of like him dribbling off his leg or just some classic freshman Cameron Crazy's mistake. And then like he thinks about it for a couple games. But you know, I also think you could make a colorable argument that on that Knight Riders team, he was the best player that wasn't Cameron Boozer. That like Caden Boozer is good. And it's nice to have a point guard like him. But in terms of like the ability to score and the ability to impactfully guard, there were games where Alex was more important. So, you know, I think you're adding a pretty high level freshman. Now, CJ Ingram, different kind of player, more of a pure wing. I think it's going to be an adjustment for him offensively, but there are people on staff that disagree with me. They're like, I think he's going to play 15, 20 minutes. You know, so we'll see. But if his defense is that good, then they will live with what they get from him offensively. His offense certainly got better in his year at Montverde. I will say that.
So all kinds of video from Alex Lloyd on Knight Riders. Also a ton of film from Westminster Academy. So shout out to Westminster Academy for having a bunch of their stuff on as Neil rocks the hat, as they have a bunch on Synergy. So great investment going on in Florida high school basketball. So so needless to say, I will definitely do an Alex Lloyd video at some point on Patreon, where we watch some of his AAU and or high school video. Which is also, again, I will tease. There is one video that is yet to be released on Patreon that is just AAU footage that has touched the eyes of very, very few people in this entire world. Like, honestly, the number might be in single digits prior to
it's coming this week.
Prior to it hitting the Patreon, and I think that people are going to respond very, very. People are going to find it very interesting.
Six-man club members only.
Yeah, this is like I thought when I did a Victor Mikic, like second division Montenegrin Patreon, I was like, now this is something that I like. Eyes like there's maybe like 6 people in the world who have watched this prior to hitting Patreon. This is another one of those things, but this one is something that people will find much more interesting. So. And again, I do think that, and hey, there's people who are listening right now that have listened to us for 6 or 7 or I don't know, 8 years. And people will know that for 6 or 7 or 8 of those years, I've been really diminishing the, whether it be Florida or other teams, I've really diminished the projected impact of incoming freshmen. And then last year, we just saw an absolute resurgence in freshmen all across the country, not just 5 stars, or guys that were top 10, but guys that were top 50 that were coming in and being awesome right away. We saw it with Fears and Phylon in the SEC, guys that like were good recruits. Don't get me wrong, but we're not, hey, these are 5 stars that are going to be surefire kind of dominant players. And I do think that is, after watching a little bit of Lloyd, which again, I don't feel like I'm an expert yet, but from what I've watched of Lloyd, I'm like, oh my goodness, like this guy can play right away. And I've been just really impressed with what I've seen from Lloyd. And then I will also say, and I know I said this on a podcast, I think I've subsequently said it on Patreon. I just need to watch more Ingram. I will say from what I have watched, and I do not proclaim to be an expert, I have not been particularly impressed relative to his ability to contribute right away. I'm not saying it's not a take for Florida. I am not saying I think he's a bad player. It's just, it's hard for me to watch the only couple of games I have watched and think that's a guy who could play 15 minutes at Florida next year. But Florida staff, who has obviously watched him a lot more than I have, thinks that. People who are at On3 and 24/7, who have watched him a lot more than I have, think that he can be a big time contributor right away. So clearly, people who have seen him more than I have higher opinions, and I totally respect that. I'm not so arrogant as to suggest that I could watch 2 games and 2 showcase games of him and have an idea of what he could do. But it also, I think, just speaks to the available minutes at the small forward position. And this is something that, again, if you watch the Patreon on Brown, and once you start to see a little bit more of Ingram, who I'll also be able to do a Patreon video on, because I'm sure that Montverde has plenty of stuff available. We'll all kind of watch some stuff together, and you can decide. But it's and maybe this is simplifying it too much, but one thing I have pointed out before on the podcast is that Ohio was a fairly disappointing team in the MAC. They finished 195th in KenPom. They started the season 118th. They were really good last year. Then they got a pretty solid, like a rotation Iowa State transfer. They got AJ Clayton returned. He's been one of the best big men in that league for a while. They have, Sharif Mitchell came back. He was at Creighton for 100 years. This was a team that was expected to be good. I would argue that AJ Brown was the 3rd best player on Ohio, which was, like, again, not a great mid-major team. I mean, I don't know if this is totally fair to say, but it's one of those things that you just wonder, could Alex Lloyd as a freshman, what he would have done? Like, could he have been the 3rd player better on a not great MAC team? I think so. Could Ingram come in and be the 3rd best player on a not great Ohio team? Like, possibly. So that's not a totally fair way to compare always, but I just as people do get fairly excited for Brown's impact. And again, I think it's a good player to take for the NIL that it only required, and obviously bringing together the family connection, it makes sense. But just from like an on the court standpoint, I still have some questions. And I think one thing I keep going back to is like, yeah, this is a guy who just like wasn't the most impactful on a not very good team that really disappointed in their league. And if that is the case, then there should be an opening for the freshman to come in and compete, or Isaiah Brown. And that will that's kind of the most that's what makes things kind of interesting, is like, like everyone thinks that Hauck is going to start, but no one's like super convinced he's going to be there, the 20 plus minute at that position guy. So there's certainly just spots available, and there's just a number of guys that you could see really competing for that spot. And it actually makes for some interesting conversation, because I feel like going into the last few years, there's been very little drama when it came to the projected lineups in the offseason.
Yeah, and Isaiah Brown is a guy who's gotten lost, and this is all, I won't say it's our fault. It's my fault in some discussions that I've not included him. I know Carlin Hartman in particular is very high on Isaiah Brown, thinks he's going to make a pretty sizable jump. Carlin Hartman is not a guy I want to get into a ton of arguments about who's about to take a leap with. He has coached and succeeded as an assistant at enough places to where he knows what he's talking about. So he's a kind of guy that if he says, hey, Zay's about to be there, then Zay's probably about to be there. I haven't talked about him much because he played 25 minutes in SEC play. So like we just, we didn't see him a ton, but he was the highest recruited player, either him or Chenyelu, and the difference would have been like 2 or 3 like spots. Both were in the top 125, right? Not top 100. Both were composite 4-stars, but like the only 2 4-star players on Florida's national title roster. So it would be normal, like I guess with talent projections and recruiting composite rankings and all that stuff for Zay to improve. And I don't want to leave him out. Certainly a guy, but I think his minutes probably come at the 3 when like Houck slides to the 4 and Condon plays more of the true 5. And I guarantee you, by the way, because now I've read enough, NBA scouting profiles on Alex Condon where they're kind of like, is he like the 5 who you put on the floor next to a 4 who does a lot of great stuff? Or is he the 4 and name only who you put on the floor next to the scoring 5? Right. And like, I think that characterization of Alex Condon actually makes a ton of sense to me, Eric. So it will be interesting to see like where the Condon minutes are next year too. And maybe some of that dictates where the Houck minutes come. But I don't think Florida's going to do something with Tommy Houck where if they feel like he's not as productive at one spot, then they're going to make sure that they play lineups where he's at his most productive spot, because that's just kind of how they've managed rotations the last couple of years. And I think they'll continue to do so. Before Fawcett jumps off, I wanted to get, because I'm going to do SEC power rankings and talk NBA draft before we get out of here. So just to give color to some of the SEC power rankings, I will sneak preview and tell everyone I've got Kentucky 4th. And I'm going to say why, so I don't have to do it again later, and then let Fawcett respond to that and maybe offer his thoughts. I'm very worried about Kentucky's ability to play against teams with outstanding offensive rebounding and outstanding rim protection. Like, I loved hearing the leak that Florida gets Kentucky twice, because I think Florida can beat them twice. I think that Denzel Aberdeen raises the competitiveness of their team. Kentucky lost 5 games in year 1 under Mark Pope that they led with 5 minutes or less to go. Largely that happened not because of some esoteric, hard to kind of arbitrary measure competitiveness, but it certainly happened because they didn't guard and get stops enough. I think Denzel will help with that. I think Jelavic, the European, is kind of a wild card to me, because I don't know if he's going to guard at all, but I know he's going to shoot. And so there may be times when they need him on the floor. But Jaden Quintance, I'm not a doctor. Fawcett and I've had we're not a doctor disclaimer on this show for 7 years. But that knee surgery just happened in March. So like the idea that Jaden is going to be 100% ready to go in their non-conference slate is farcical. And so what they get from him really, to me, dictates their ceiling. And I don't know right now. So just not knowing, I hope he's fine. I hope he plays great. I hope he's healthy. He's fantastic. He's talented, nice kid. But like, he's so vital to answering the questions on that roster. So that's why I have them 4th.
So I definitely don't. Well, I was gonna say I don't disagree, but part of it is because honestly, I'm pretty I would struggle right now to put together my power rankings, and that's why I'm interested to see what you have, and I'm not going to ask you to say what you have 1, 2, and 3, but I mentioned a couple of podcasts ago, maybe just one podcast ago, how I thought that every SEC team was doing really good in the portal, but I didn't think anyone did great. And I mean, this might surprise people, but I not opened Bart Torvik's projections yet in the offseason until just a couple of days ago. And I would say that Bart Torvik's projections would completely align with what I'm saying. So I'm not going to say teams. I'm just going to say where teams are, or I guess I could say teams. Florida is 5th. Arkansas is 10th. Really pay attention to the number more than their ranking of the team here, though. So Florida 5th, Arkansas 10th, Tennessee 12th, Kentucky 13th, Alabama 19th, Vanderbilt 22nd, Missouri 28th, Oklahoma 30th, Auburn 32nd, Georgia 33rd, Texas 35, Texas A&M 36, Mississippi State 39, and then Mississippi, LSU, South Carolina are a little bit lower. But what I'm getting at here is that 13 of the SEC teams are between 5 and 39th, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them are between 19th and 39th. So I that's kind of how I felt when teams were building their rosters. And I mean, I guess it stands to reason why Torvik would agree, because it's just an algorithmic talent evaluation, of which I was kind of saying, hey, I kind of really like everyone's talent, but I don't love everyone's talent. And I say all that to say, like, I'm struggling to see how I think this league is going to shake out, particularly at the top. I think I have Tennessee probably up there as one of the best teams alongside Florida. But after that, I mean, like I said, like Torvik has Arkansas second. I don't, that would not be how I would place them. So I can see a place where I can look at that Kentucky roster and say that I think that it's a top 3 roster. But it's one of those things that I feel like so many teams in this league have really good depth, but I don't love their high end talent. And then you look at Kentucky, where they are the ultimate example of that, where I think they have the best depth. And then I'm still not totally sure about how I love their top end talent. So, needless to say, if someone wanted to put Kentucky anywhere from 2nd to 6th, I think that there's a pretty reasonable place to do that. But right now, I just, right now, I think that there's just so much kind of up in the air, and it makes it pretty interesting. I feel like a lot of people had pretty similar kind of SEC rankings this time last year. Like, if someone had Florida as the best team in the league, or Tennessee or Kentucky, I mean, that would be all reasonable. And also, like, if someone had Kentucky 6th, I think that would also be reasonable. And where everyone puts that kind of blender of Tennessee and Arkansas and Kentucky and Alabama, it's interesting to see. But I do feel, though, like this is the perfect year for Florida to come off a championship in a league where everyone's good, but I don't feel like there's clear wagons, where last year it felt like there was multiple wagons, and of course Florida just still found a way to outcompete most of them, all of them. Yeah. But this year just feels totally different. So needless to say, I think I might have Kentucky, 3rd, but I have not been able to lay it out accurately, and I do think 4th is totally reasonable for the reasons you said.
Well, you know what, Fawcett, when you come back, maybe you'll hop on at minute 42 and hear, hear how I shake things out. I will say before you go, the sneaky team that I liked their portal, and maybe it's because I was so surprised by how good they were last year, and like, I think he's just a really good roster builder based on what I've seen at James Madison and now Vanderbilt, to tease it obvious and make it obvious, is Mark Byington. Like, I thought, like, that group of George Kimball, Duke Miles, who can just bang shots, and then Tyler Harris, who was Washington's, like, I mean, he's a good player, right? He's an SEC caliber player. Like, those 3 guys. I hate losing Vernon Carey, like, if I'm them, because I thought he was just so critical to, like, their ability to play inside and out. But they got a kid from a powerhouse wagon program in Dallas, Jalen Dean Vines, who's 6'3", shot 40% in AAU ball from behind the arc. I think he's going to be yet another impact freshman. I like what they did in the portal, maybe more than some people. I saw their portal ranking class was like 46th, and then it was like 14th in Maya. And I was like, oh, because whenever there's a disparity and it's like 32 spots and like Maya to like 247 has it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because that tells me that the basketball that gets played says that those players are better than the sex appeal portal rankings.
Yeah, I still find it such and this goes back even to high school rankings, where it's so hard for evaluating volume versus just quality. And I look at the rankings and I don't really understand them. So not something I like if you would have said where Florida's class is ranked, I just have no idea and don't really particularly care. And again, it's so hard to weigh against the returning players and who actually like needed to go. Obviously Florida didn't need to go out and get 6 impact players, but yeah, I really like how Vanderbilt is plays, and they certainly could use that front court size that they weren't able to retain. That would be the only question. But in terms of like versatility, offensive talent on the perimeter, really good team. So Torvik is on it for sure with just their overall talent, and that is certainly going to be a fun team to watch. But yeah, I'm going to check out now, and Neil's gonna close it out. But thank you everyone for listening and the support.
There you go. So good to have Fawcett. Evan Mia had Florida's transfer class 4th, by the way, and then it's 5th in the other ranking. The other ranking of note. So my power rankings in the SEC: South Carolina, I got 16. I got Ole Miss at 15. Might surprise some people. I thought they would be a little more active in among star power in the portal. I thought they would run at PJ Haggerty. There were all those connections there. They did not get him. The only real impact portal player is Keza Gifa from High Point, who was their 4th or 5th best option on a great team. Now, look, they did do a good job recruiting. Nico Bundalo, the McDonald's All-American, is in. Ilias Kamardine was one of the top 10 international players. And there's a chance, obviously, that AJ Storr figures out who he can be and becomes the all Big Ten player that made him one of the top players in the portal when he went to Kansas. But from a confidence standpoint, from a locker room standpoint, there's nothing but question marks around Storr. Didn't like what Chris Beard did in the portal. I got LSU over at 14. I'm a little higher on the Tigers, even though they had kind of a portal exodus. I like their young talent that is still there. Have them at the 14 spot. I have Miss State at 13. Might consider that to be a little low when you return to Josh Hubbard, but I still don't think that there's enough help around Josh Hubbard at this point in time to kind of make them a team that's anything beyond a squad on the bubble. At 12, I got Texas. I think Sean Miller, did a nice job. They returned 3 guards in Jordan Pope, Traymond Mark, who I was surprised returned, and Chendall Weaver, who is a absolute menace defensively and helped them make that late push to get to the NCAA tournament. They don't have a lot of firepower. Look, everybody says Matas Vokiatis, the big FAU kid, is an animal. And obviously, he's 7-footer who can shoot, stretch the floor. Simeon Welcher was at St. John's. Cameron Hyde was going to like those guys. It's a top end talent question for me without Trey Johnson. I got them at 12. For me, I got Georgia at 11. I like Kason Catchings. I wish that Mike White had scheduled some people so we could see, like, if I'm wrong. I love Blue Kane. You all know how I feel about his game. I think he's a guy who can make a big leap next season. For me at 10, I got Texas A&M. I like the more I look at this roster, the more I got to say shout out to my guy Malik Grady. I think he's right. Like, I like what Bucky did, building a big boy roster pretty quickly. I mean, Bucky was one of the last hires, Bucky McMillan, the new head coach. And what they did was grab 3 top 75 transfers, all guys who can shoot. Pop Isaacs, the Creighton star, very good player. Jakari Lane at North Alabama, a big-time bucket getter who I think had North Alabama in the NCAA tournament at least one of those years. And then Rylan Griffin is a guy who has all the talent in the world to play in the NBA. And Mackenzie McBacco, who's a player who, again, if healthy, was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year at one point, and I think can run that back and play his way into an NBA draft pick after testing the waters and getting feedback. So there's not a ton of depth, which is going to hurt them in terms of probably how fast stylistically they want to play, but there's certainly enough there for Bucky and that team to make the NCAA tournament year one, which I think would be a huge win for those guys. At 9, I've got Vanderbilt. I've talked a little bit about what I like about them. I do think from a front court standpoint, like you would like to see maybe something better from them in terms of their size and girth up in the front court. But I like that team. I think there's a lot of players there that are guys that impress me. And Mark Byington can flat out coach, man. That's the bottom line. I got them at 9. Oklahoma, I have at 8. Love what they did in the portal. Think that this is a team that, even without Jeremiah Fears and without the shooter, Duke Miles, actually got better as a whole. In the offseason, I think Xavier Brown and Darion Reed are guys that are just really super impactful players that they lacked. That kind of star power last year. Obviously, Nigel Pack has been to a Final Four and can shoot teams back into games. Getting Mo Agu was a guy who adds toughness to that roster, and certainly, getting him to stay on board is a big deal for them. I think he's a tough player. So I like Oklahoma's roster. At 7, I have Missouri. I thought they did a spectacular job in retention. Didn't bring a ton of pieces in that really wow you. But I love Dennis Gates. I think he's a great coach. He's a tremendous motivator. They're very hard to play against stylistically, with the way that they guard you from half court. And then they added, I think, a first-team All-SEC guy. Didn't add. They kept a first-team All-SEC guy in Mark Mitchell, who's one of the best players in the country in terms of being a complete player. I expect a leap from T.O. Barrett. Anthony Robinson II, another guy that they retained that I thought was just huge for them to retain. The bottom line is I think this is a team that can compete in that top tier of the SEC. At 6, I have Tennessee. You could make the argument that this is too low, right? I think that's a very fair kind of point to make when they add Nate Ament, the freshman. But the thing about Ament is he's not like a 12, 13-point a game scorer out of the gate. I think he's a guy who's going to do a lot of nice things for them. But it would surprise me if he's option 3 offensively. They are really relying on Jacoby Gillespie, who has been the third option his whole career, to flourish as the first option. I think Jacoby can certainly play. He's a great shooter. I don't know how great he'll be as option 1. I did love the Jalen Carey ad. I thought he was instrumental in them beating Tennessee at Vanderbilt last year. And I think another guy who just seems to suit what Rick Barnes wants to do so well. I'm already almost talking myself into putting them 5th, but I don't see the killer. I don't see the guy who makes them different offensively, the way that Chaz Lanier and Dalton Knecht did. So I've got them 6. I think Auburn is not wildly underrated, but I think they're underrated as we begin to talk about this team. Obviously, the return of Pettiford changes a ton of things, but I love Keyshawn Hall. Again, all Big 12 player, 35% 3-point shooter on high volume. Not the best rim finisher. I think it's an area where he can improve his game, but he's a guy who can really score, and he gets to the free throw line at a stupendous rate, which Bruce Pearl loves to run and attack. And I think Keyshawn Hall is perfect for that style. I think he's going to turn out to be one of the more underrated transfers in this league. Kevin Overton is a guy who, as Florida fans saw, can really heat up and shoot. And then they have consistently figured out ways to make impactful players of guys they get from the D2 and D3 level. I think they will do that again this season. At 4, I told you I had Kentucky. At 3 for me, I've got Arkansas. I like their roster. I think the only question for them is like where certain pieces fit. Like is a guy like DJ Wagner going to be in their starting lineup? I don't know the answer to that. We all knew that Adu Thoreau wouldn't come back, but I liked the way Carter Knox finished the season last year. And then I told you guys I'm nuts about Darius Akoff Jr., a tremendous player. Malik Ewan, I think, is an excellent player as well, who can really score and impact games. He was a reason that Florida State flirted with bubble status last year. The curious selections, the curious things for me really are like, what do they do with Billy Richmond III, who's kind of a zero on the offensive end? And can Carter Knox kind of take that next step? Malik Thomas Darius Acuff, DJ Wagner, those guys are going to give them buckets. So, like, what do they do with those role pieces? And how does that roster come together? Always the question under John Calipari. Alabama, for me, is second, maybe a little higher than others, but I actually had them seventh, and then LeBaron Philon came back. And I think with LeBaron Philon, Latrell Wrightsell Jr., Aiden Holloway, you have the best backcourt in the SEC. I still think that there are some front court questions, right? Like, I love Aiden Sherrill. I like the idea of getting him healthy for an entire season, and I'm sure Nate Oates does too. I thought Tyler Bilboen was one of the weirder takes in the portal. A real nothing on the offensive end who doesn't fit in Nate Oates' system, but certainly can rebound a little bit, but also gets out physical on the glass. He played against the Gators last year, and Florida out rebounded them 47-29 in that game. And he was, kind of an immense non-factor. It will certainly be interesting to see if that immense non-factordom continues to arrive in large games. But, maybe with him and the all Ivy League player or all Patriot League player, Noah Williamson, their front court is a little more steady than it was last year. But again, who knows? It could just be a matter of fit. But I love their backcourt so much. And as we saw, an elite backcourt can cover up all manner of ills. And I think that will be the case with Alabama. And then the Gators I have at number 1 in my SEC way too early power rankings. Obviously the best front court in the country. And I think a chance to be really good in the backcourt, kind of the X factor being like how Xavion Lee adjusts to basketball in the SEC, coming over from the Ivy League. And then, like, who is that third guard? Is it Herb? Is it Irby Klavzar? Is it Alex Lloyd? Is it some combination of A.J. Brown, Zay Brown? By committee is the third guy. You'd really like to kind of establish a guy who you knew was guard 3. Watch that early in the season. So hope you guys enjoyed this podcast, and go Gators. Keep attacking closeouts.